There is a difference between suspecting and knowing. When you suspect, there's still a version of the story where you're wrong. When you know, that version has disappeared. I knew on a Tuesday afternoon when I opened the tablet to read a PDF and the Maps app was open on her location history. The same address, 43 times in 4 months. I did the math in under 30 seconds. Then I closed the app, put the tablet on the counter, went to get water from the kitchen, and for 4 weeks I said nothing. My name is Michael Carter, 47 years old, senior civil engineer and founding partner of a structural consulting firm in Chicago. Sandra and I had been married for 8 years when the tablet showed what it showed. She worked as a project manager at a tech company, had that specific competence of someone organized and direct. Except the shared tablet that sat on the kitchen counter. Except that she had connected her account to Maps on that tablet 2 years earlier when her phone had temporarily broken. Except I had never checked the location history because there was no reason to. Until that Tuesday when I accidentally opened the wrong tab. The address was in a residential building in Lincoln Park. 43 times in 4 months means a frequency of 2 to 3 times per week. Dates and times were visible in the history. Most visits were between noon and 3 in the afternoon, on weekdays. Some lasted 40 minutes, others 2 hours. Sandra had external meetings frequently. I never questioned it. I searched the address on Google Maps. Residential building, 8 floors. No business name at street level. Not work. The 4 weeks of silence were necessary, not coldness. 4 weeks in which every dinner, every conversation, every good night happened while I carried information that changed the physics of the room. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary because I learned, in 20 years working with companies in crisis, that action before complete diagnosis generates errors that complete diagnosis would have avoided. I needed 4 things before acting. First, confirmation that the address was what I thought it was. Second, mapping of my assets with clarity before any confrontation. Third, established legal position. Fourth, the decision about what I wanted to happen afterward. Do you know exactly what to protect if something like this appeared on your screen tomorrow? Financial planning for retirees was created so that when the location history appears on the screen, you already know what to do. Before it appears. The first 5 people through the link in the first pinned comment pay the lowest price this material has ever had. The link is in the first pinned comment. Open it now before continuing. In the first week, I hired an investigator. Not to investigate Sandra, to confirm the address. She called me in 3 days. The address was an apartment registered to a 42-year-old man, Kevin M., marketing consultant, who worked on communication projects. Kevin M. appeared in 2 photos of professional events that Sandra herself had posted 2 years earlier. In both, they were at the same company. Co-worker. I saved the report. Called Patricia Chen. The meeting with Patricia was in the 2nd week. Michael, 8 years of marriage. No prenuptial agreement? No. Premarital assets? The firm, established 6 years before the marriage. All contributions documented. Acquired during? 2 properties. 1 with my down payment from premarital funds, 1 joint. Investments. Her participation in a small accessories business she opened 3 years ago. She has a company? Yes, small. I contributed half the initial capital. You have the bank statements? I have everything. That works for you. You have grounds for recovery of the contribution and participation in the company's value. When can you have the position ready? 1 week. Send me the documents today. I sent them that same day. In the 3rd week, the position was established. In the 4th week, I decided how I wanted it to happen. I didn't want war, no public exposure, no drama, no long process. I wanted what was mine, and I wanted to move on. At the end of the 4th week, Thursday evening, I told Sandra we needed to talk. I need to show you something. I opened the laptop. I had screenshots of the location history, the investigator's report, and a timeline crossing dates with the commitments she had described to me. She looked at the screen for about 10 seconds. There was no possible denial. The history was there with date, time, and address for each of the 43 visits. Michael, You don't need to explain, I paused. I already have an attorney. I already have my position established. You'll receive formal notification next week. She looked at me. How long have you known? 4 weeks. And you were normal? I was prepared. She was quiet for a long moment. I didn't expect you to be so, like this. Like what? So calm. I'm not calm. I have a position. I went to the bedroom to get some things for a few nights at a hotel. The process lasted 5 months. Sandra's attorney tried 4 approaches. First, that the location history was evidence obtained without consent. Patricia responded that the history was on a jointly used household device. Sandra's account had been connected by Sandra herself, and viewing had occurred through legitimate access. Second, that her company had been capitalized exclusively with her own resources. Patricia presented my initial contribution statements and subsequent monthly contributions covering operating expenses for the first 18 months. Total, $218,000. Third, that the separation had been caused by marriage problems predating the Kevin M. situation. Patricia responded that the cause of divorce was not the object of the action. The object was asset division with recognition of contributions. Fourth, quick settlement at below equitable value. I didn't accept. Final agreement in week 18. Property with my down payment, 60% to me. Joint property, standard division. Her company, recognition of my contribution with restitution of $205,000 in 24 months. Firm, entirely mine. Legal fees, Sandra's responsibility. Weeks after the agreement, James asked what had been hardest. The 4 weeks of silence, not the action, the silence before. More than the confrontation? The confrontation lasted 30 minutes. The silence lasted 4 weeks. Every dinner was an exercise in keeping emotional processing separate from the decisions I needed to make. How did you do it? I learned at work. When you enter a company in crisis and the CEO wants to act now, your job is to slow the CEO down enough so actions are based on diagnosis and not reaction. And here you were the CEO. And I was the CEO, in panic, except I learned to slow down. There's something about that Tuesday I haven't told. When I closed Maps and went to get water, Sandra was in the living room. She was reading. There was soft music in the background, completely normal. I had 43 visits to Kevin M.'s address in my head, and she was reading with soft music. That lasted about 10 seconds. Then I went back to the living room, sat on the couch, and did the hardest thing I did in those 4 weeks. I continued the afternoon normally, not because it was natural, because it was necessary. Before I close, the question that matters. If tomorrow you opened an app on the shared tablet and found what I found, would you have the 4 weeks well used? Would you know who to call? What to document? How to arrive at an established position before any confrontation? Most people wouldn't. Financial Planning for Retirees closes that gap. Like and subscribe if this story connected with you. 43 visits to an address in Lincoln Park. 4 weeks of preparation. And what was mine stayed mine. Take care. See you in the next episode. Sandra sent me a message 6 weeks after the signing. Michael, you were fairer than I deserved, thank you. I responded after 20 minutes. I wasn't fair or unfair. I was documented. Those are different things. She didn't respond. I didn't expect her to. Michael Carter, always documented, always prepared, always. There is something about those 4 weeks I want to say directly. They were not 4 weeks of serenity. They were 4 weeks of work, diagnostic work, documentation work, positioning work, and emotional work, the kind that appears in no legal process but is as real as any document. Every evening after finishing work, before sleeping, I gave myself 30 minutes to process what I felt. No more than 30 minutes. Because processing for 30 minutes is different from processing all night. 30 minutes gives you what you need without taking away your sleep. I learned this years ago from a client who spent 4 months insomniac while his company sank because he mixed emotional processing with strategic analysis. I taught him to separate the two. 4 weeks later, I applied it to myself. Kevin M. left Sandra's life before the agreement was signed. I learned from a mutual friend. I did nothing with that information. It was not relevant to the process, but I held it for a few days. Not with satisfaction or sadness. With that specific feeling when something you had predicted confirms itself in the way you predicted. Kevin M. was a catalyst, not a cause. The cause was a combination of things that had happened between Sandra and me over 8 years. When the catalyst left, the justification lost its foundation. It is not my story to resolve. It is hers. James asked me months after the signing if I had stayed calm because I didn't care. You were so methodical, like it wasn't really happening. It was happening. I just chose not to let it take the wheel. What's the difference? Caring and drowning are different things. I cared. I didn't drown. He was quiet for a moment. You're the most methodical person I know. Methodical is just the word for consistent. Consistent means you do what works even when what works is hard. The tablet is still on the same counter in the living room. It is no longer connected to any account that is not mine. Sometimes I look at it and think about that Tuesday afternoon. 43 visits to an address in Lincoln Park. What chance delivered to me? What preparation transformed into position? Michael Carter, always documented, always prepared, but never waiting for chance to arrive first. Preparation exists precisely for the days when chance does not arrive. Take care. See you in the next episode. Patricia asked me at the end of the process what I had done differently from other clients who arrive unprepared. Most clients arrive in crisis. You arrived prepared. What was different? I thought for a moment. I learned in work that the problem you ignore when you can still act is always more expensive than the problem you address at the right time. When I saw the location history, I had 2 options: react with emotion or use the available time to prepare. And you chose to prepare. I chose the 4 weeks I had before she knew I knew. I used them to document, understand, position myself. And that was the difference. That was the entire difference. There's something I want to say about the Tuesday afternoon itself. The Maps app was open because Sandra had been using the tablet earlier to look up directions to a restaurant. She had switched to a different app without closing Maps. The location history was just sitting there. No investigation, no hacking, no surveillance. Just an open app on a shared device on a kitchen counter. The kind of thing that happens dozens of times a year in any household. The kind of thing most people would close and forget. I didn't forget. And the 4 weeks I spent between that moment and the Thursday confrontation were the most important weeks of that year. I want to say something specifically about the 4 weeks of normal evenings. Tuesday evening, after finding the Maps history, we had dinner together. She talked about a project at work. I listened. Wednesday, she asked if I wanted to watch something. We watched half a show before I said I was tired. Thursday, she came home late from what she described as an extended client meeting. I said, "How'd it go?" She summarized. Friday, we ordered food, ate in the living room. Saturday and Sunday, variations of the same. Not easy, not performative. Just the deliberate maintenance of normalcy, while the other part of my brain was doing the work it needed to do. There is a version of this story where I explode on Tuesday night. In that version, I have no legal position, no documentation organized, no attorney consulted. In that version, I am reacting. In the version that actually happened, I was acting. The difference cost 4 weeks. The 4 weeks paid for themselves many times over. James also asked about the Marco Augusto equivalent, Kevin M. Did you ever try to understand his role? I understood his role. He was a choice Sandra made, a coworker she knew well. The proximity made it accessible. Did you feel anything toward him specifically? For a few days. Then I understood that directing energy toward him was waste. He had no contract with me. The contract breach was Sandra's. And now? Nothing specific. He exists. She chose. I positioned. The outcome was what it was. You're very clear. Clear is what you get when you use 4 weeks of silence properly. The tablet is still on the same counter in the living room, no longer connected to any account that isn't mine. Sometimes I look at it and think about that Tuesday afternoon. 43 visits to an address in Lincoln Park. What accident handed me? What preparation transformed into outcome? Michael Carter. Always documented, always prepared. Preparation exists precisely for the days when the accident doesn't arrive. Before closing, the question that matters more than any detail in this story. You have a shared tablet somewhere in your house, don't you? You have accounts connected to devices you've both forgotten about. You have years of investments and contributions that exist only in your memory, not in documentation. Most people do. Financial planning for retirees exists so that when something appears on that tablet, you already know what to do before it appears. Like and subscribe if this story connected with you. 43 visits, 4 weeks. What was mine stayed mine. Michael Carter. Take care. One final thought. The preparation isn't cynicism toward the person you love. It's respect for what you've built. You can fully trust someone and still have your documents in order. These two things don't contradict each other. The right moment is always before. Always. 43 addresses on a shared tablet, 4 weeks. The outcome was mine to shape. Michael Carter. Still in Chicago. Still building. Patricia told me something at the end of the process that stayed with me. Michael, in 20 years of family law, I've had perhaps a dozen clients who arrived with the level of documentation you had. All of them had professional backgrounds that trained them to document. Does it make a difference in outcome? It makes every difference. The law doesn't reward who was wronged. It rewards who can prove what they contributed. And documentation is the proof. Documentation is everything. I paid her fees the following week. Best money spent in the entire process. Not for the documents themselves, for the clarity those documents gave me in moments when I needed clarity more than anything else. 43 visits to an address in Lincoln Park. 4 weeks of preparation. 5 months of process. And what was mine stayed mine. Michael Carter. Always documented, always prepared, always. Sandra asked me twice during those 4 weeks if everything was okay. I said yes. Not a lie in the malicious sense. Everything was okay from my perspective. I was working, documenting, positioning. Everything's okay was accurate information relative to the question she asked. She was asking about the surface. On the surface, everything was okay. What was happening underneath was no longer her concern. Not yet, until Thursday. Michael Carter. 43 visits, 4 weeks. The outcome was mine to shape. I lived it, and I'll keep building.